All right, so we're diving into GE more today.
Okay.
We've got articles, summaries, the whole deal about this philosophical giant.
Right.
And we're here to help unearth the really cool stuff,
Yeah.
the mind-bending ideas that'll change how you see the world, you know?
Absolutely.
It's about getting you to think differently.
Yeah. What always gets me about Moore is how he takes these huge philosophical questions like the nature of good,
Right.
but
Fair.
somehow makes them relevant to our everyday lives.
Yeah, and speaking of good, that's where this whole naturalistic fallacy thing comes in, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It sounds like a detective movie or something.
It kind of is.
A little bit, right?
Moore was like a philosophical detective,
Yeah.
you know? And the naturalistic fallacy, that was his prime suspect.
Okay.
So before Moore, philosophers, they tried to define good in terms of something else, right? Pleasure, happiness, you name it.
So good equals a big bowl of ice cream.
Exactly.
Okay.
But Moore said, hold on, that doesn't work.
Why?
Because it's like saying red defines apple. Some apples are red, sure,
Right.
but there are green ones too. Good, he argued, is its own thing, its own concept.
So even if something brings us joy, like that ice cream, it's not automatically good in a bigger sense, like a moral sense.
You got it. And Moore has this great tool, actually, to help explain this. It's called the open question argument.
Okay, hit me with it.
All right, so let's say someone says good means whatever brings the most happiness. Moore would just ask, but is maximizing happiness really good?
Oh, I see.
The fact that you can even ask that question
Yeah.
means good is something deeper, more fundamental.
It's not just about the outcome.
Right, exactly.
Wow, that's kind of a conversation stopper.
Right.
Like I could have something that makes a lot of people happy, but it's not necessarily morally sound. Like imagine a world where everyone's perfectly content,
Okay.
but it's because of some hidden manipulation, you know?
Yeah.
Kind of creepy.
It might look like a utopia on the surface, but is it truly good? That's where this whole thing falls apart.
Right, because it ignores something more fundamental about what we consider good.
Exactly. You can't just reduce it to a formula or a feeling.
So are we saying then that good can't be defined at all?
That's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Moore believed good is this simple, fundamental concept, kind of like, when you see the color yellow,
Yeah.
you just know it's yellow, right?
Right.
You can't really explain it in terms of anything else.
You can't break it down.
Right, you just grasp it intuitively.
Okay, so we can't just break it down into smaller pieces, but doesn't that make morality totally subjective? Like what's good for me might be totally different for you.
That's a common misunderstanding, actually.
Okay.
While Moore believed in this idea of moral intuition,
Okay.
he also argued for the objectivity of moral truths.
Hmm.
He just thought those truths weren't based on things like pleasure or societal norms,
Right.
but on something deeper, something we inherently recognize as good.
Got it. So it's not about personal preference, but like tapping into a universal understanding of goodness itself.
Exactly.
Okay, this is getting pretty deep.
Yeah,
But before we really disappear down this rabbit hole of moral philosophy,
sure.
let's move on to another one of Moore's big ideas, and I'm seeing this one everywhere in these sources.
Okay.
It's this idea of common sense realism.
Right. And this one might seem simpler on the surface,
Yeah.
but his defense of everyday beliefs, it's actually quite radical, especially for his time.
Yeah, it's easy to assume common sense is, well, common.
Right.
But back in Moore's day, you had these philosophers like Hume and Kant,
Okay.
and they were really shaking things up.
How so?
They were diving deep into skepticism,
Okay.
questioning whether we can really know anything for certain about the world outside our own minds.
So, how do I know I'm not just a brain in a vat?
Precisely. Like, how do we know this isn't all a simulation?
Right.
And, those are all interesting questions.
Yeah. But Moore felt like, they were getting a little too far removed from how we actually experience life.
Okay.
He was like, come on,
Yeah.
our basic common sense beliefs,
Okay.
things like other people exist,
Uh-huh.
I have a body, the past actually happened.
Right.
He said these aren't just random assumptions.
Yeah.
They're actually pretty reliable starting points.
Yeah. So instead of going down the rabbit hole of, like, questioning everything,
Right.
he's saying, hey, I'm sitting in a chair. This coffee mug is real. Maybe we can go from there.
Yeah. He famously illustrated this point
How?
with the most straightforward example you can imagine.
Okay.
He held up his hands and said, here is one hand and here is another.
You really did that?
Yeah. I mean, it's meant to be funny,
Okay.
but also to kind of cut through all the philosophical jargon
Right.
and just say, look,
Yeah.
you have these fundamental experiences, right?
Right.
And they form the bedrock of our knowledge.
I mean, he's not wrong. I've never really questioned if my hands exist.
Right.
But so how does this connect to the bigger picture here? Is he saying we should just blindly accept everything we see and hear?
Not at all. It's not about blind faith.
Yeah, okay.
It's more about recognizing that our common sense beliefs have gotten us this far as a species.
Right, right.
They're generally reliable
Yeah.
for, like, navigating the world.
Yeah.
Of course, that doesn't mean we stop questioning things
Right.
or thinking critically, but it gives us a place to start.
So it's more about choosing a starting point that makes sense.
Exactly.
Like, okay, I'm going to trust that this chair exists.
Right.
So I can focus on, like, bigger questions.
Exactly. It's like acknowledging the solid ground we're standing on
Right.
before we, build our elaborate philosophical structures on top of it.
We need that shared reality.
Exactly. And from there, Moore would argue, we can actually have much more fruitful philosophical debate.
Interesting. This is making me realize how much I just take for granted just, walking around every day. Like,
Right.
I don't question if my house is actually there when I leave,
Right.
But if Moore was all about common sense, did he ever, like, challenge other big thinkers? I mean, isn't that part of what philosophy is like debating these ideas?
Oh, absolutely. Just because he valued common sense doesn't mean he shied away from debate.
Okay.
And in fact, one of the most interesting clashes he had was with the utilitarians.
The utilitarians, right.
Yeah.
Greatest happiness for the greatest number or whatever.
Exactly.
I remember that from, like, Intro to Philosophy.
Right.
But how did Moore square that with his whole thing about good being undefinable?
Right.
Like, it can't be reduced to some other thing.
Well, that's the heart of the debate, right? Because utilitarianism, it basically says, look,
Yeah.
good is whatever creates the most happiness
Okay.
or well-being, right? It's all about the outcome.
So it's very consequence-focused.
Yeah, very much so.
Okay.
And Moore, he just felt like that was too simplistic.
Really?
Yeah, he thought it was too easily measured,
Okay.
like it missed out on something really crucial.
Because a world with maximum happiness might not actually be morally good.
Exactly.
Like we were saying earlier.
Right. You could have that thought experiment with the perfectly content society, but it's, controlled by some hidden force.
Right. Right.
And even if you could achieve maximum happiness for everybody,
Yeah.
Moore would say, hold on a second, there's something inherently wrong with that.
Interesting.
It ignores things like individual autonomy, freedom, things that we consider valuable,
Right.
regardless of whether or not they lead to, good feelings.
So even if you could, like, do the math and figure out this one action would lead to the absolute most happiness,
Right.
Moore would still be like, hold on.
He'd say, hold on, there might be other things to think about,
Yeah.
other moral considerations.
It's like he's adding this whole other dimension to ethics,
Exactly. It's not just about calculating happiness.
Right.
It's also about, like, recognizing the inherent value of certain actions or ideals.
Yeah, you got it. And this tension between Moore's view and the utilitarians,
Yeah.
it's not just an academic debate.
Really?
No, I mean, it plays out in how we deal with real-world issues.
Like what?
Well, think about the ethics of AI, for example.
Okay.
Should our goal be to create AI that just maximizes happiness for everyone?
Right.
Or are there other moral principles we need to program in?
It's like, what does it even mean to be ethical if a machine is making the decisions?
Right, exactly.
Wow. So Moore's ideas are like, they're still relevant today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're like this thread that runs through history, connecting us to these big questions.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
It really is.
So as we kind of start to wrap up this deep dive into G.E. Moore,
Okay.
what would you say is the biggest takeaway for our listener?
Well, I think Moore really challenges us to examine our assumptions,
To look beyond those easy answers.
Yeah.
He reminds us that just because something seems natural or pleasurable or even efficient
Right.
doesn't automatically make it good.
Don't just assume, investigate.
Exactly.
I love that
Yeah.
we've gone over so much today, from the nature of good to, like, the very foundation of knowledge.
Right.
And honestly, I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
There's always more to explore with Moore.
Right.
Absolutely. But if this got you thinking, if it made you question some assumptions, that's a good start.
It really is.
Yeah.
So until next time.
Keep those philosophical gears turning.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
So until next time, we'll catch you on our next deep dive into the world of ideas.
Right.